Hello, this is Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experience, and today we're going to talk about part 3 of the Wealth Magic series here, which this time is really about the application of magic. In part 1, we talked about the power of need. In part 2, we talked about the power of discipline. Today we're going to talk about the application of magic. Now, if you are new to this channel, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bells, so that way you get notified when I go live. If you're a frequent flyer here, feel free to click the like button and leave a comment. So when we talk about wealth magic, and I've laid the foundation out. We've looked at the power of need versus want, and we know that need trumps want each and every time. And I think this is true for magic in general, but certainly with wealth magic it is. We've also looked at the power of discipline and why a disciplined approach to wealth in general is essential. But now I want to get into the actual brass tacks here and explore how to apply magic to a situation, because I think that all the talk in the world about the foundation is important. And for the last video of the series, which will be the next one, we are going to talk about pairing magic with mundane things that you want to be doing as well. But I want to talk about the application of magic. So when you're deciding what kind of wealth magic you're going to do, you've looked at the situation, you've determined you're going to do some type of wealth magic. I think that it's really important to take a look at a few different factors here. And the first factor that I think that we want to look at is the importance of applying both a short and long-term perspective to whatever wealth magic you're going to be doing. What I mean by that is, how will you've decided you need to do some type of wealth magic. Maybe it's wealth magic to get some money to come in. Maybe it's wealth magic to get something that you really want or need in your life, or something else. Whatever it is, you need to look at both the short and long-term effect of it. The short-term effect is going to be, it might be the immediate gratification or near or short-term gratification you get from getting something. And that can be quite a rush. And I think a lot of times when people do wealth magic, they focus on the short term. But I think that we need to also apply a long-term perspective. What am I really getting into here? How is this going to impact me for however long it's going to impact me? I'm going to use the example of wealth magic for my house. I did wealth magic where I simultaneously worked with both Saturn and Aphrodite to help me get the house that I'm in. I worked with Saturn in terms of timing and figuring out when to start looking, when to buy the house. I was helped by my astrologer friend Eric Roth who does shamanic astrology, and he'd done a thing for me, and he happened to mention like the optimal period for buying a house and like settling and everything. And it's funny, like I literally did end up getting the house that I'm in, literally on like around the day, a couple days into that period of time that he recommended would be optimal. So, I paid attention to that. I started looking for the house like a month or two earlier than that, because house hunting takes some time. But I really did look at the timing of it and in relationship to my astrological chart. And I thought that was really, and that's an important thing. Well, when we talk about wealth magic, you might be thinking active applications, but I think you can also be thinking of passive applications of wealth magic. Like in this case, astrologically, what does my chart look like? Now, I'm not an astrologer, but I would recommend, I can recommend a number of different people. I definitely recommend Eric anytime and any place. His work has always spoken profoundly to me, and it's been accurate and spot on. But I can also speak to a few other people. Rich Kiska, for example, is another person that has given me some great astrological advice and does some professional work. So, if you're ever like looking at a situation and you want to get kind of, I'm going to call it a passive, and by this I don't mean it. I mean passive only in the sense that these are astrological currents that are going on in your life. Whether or not you do anything with them or not is up to you, but they're there. That's what I mean by passive. So I want to be very clear about that. But I would say that like that to me, like that's a good example of where you can draw upon those the passive aspects of magic, and apply that meaningfully to your spiritual work. So that's something that we want to be thinking about. The other thing that I would point out or draw upon, though, is that is that in this case, again, I worked with Saturn. Saturn kind of helped me figure out the timing. I worked with Venus or with Aphrodite for wealth magic. Now, you might not think of Venus and Aphrodite as wealth magic. I mean, after all, she's a goddess of love. But if you think about it, um, she is also she's definitely a goddess of wealth. I mean, love comes with wealth, and what I did in the aspect of working with her, what I did is when I found the house that I wanted and I decided I really wanted this house, I actually did a working with her to basically help the people on the other end, on the other side, fall in love with my offer over anyone else's. That they would want to give that, they would want me to buy the house instead of someone else. And there were a couple other people um, going for this house. So in the end, it ended up being one of those cases where doing that doing that wealth magic was really applicable, and it came in the form of working with Venus in terms of causing a distinct liking for me over somebody else. Um, so that's another example of wealth magic right there. So the short term application was getting the house, and I got it. I ended up getting the house. But the long term aspect of this is that, well, now I have this house and I have a 30-year mortgage. Now I can pay off that mortgage a bit earlier by choosing to pay extra each month on the mortgage. So it doesn't have to be a 30-year. But even if I choose to pay extra, I'm still going to be committing to a certain period of time where I am paying for this house. Now, I could choose to sell the house down the line if I wanted to, or I can keep it or whatever else. But again, all of that has to be balanced and weighed out with the perspective of this house is going, this is something I'm committing to for the long term to some degree or another. And if I choose to sell the house at some point, then I'm going to be definitely having to deal with the reality that the house is going to be, I may not get as much back on it. Certainly I wouldn't sell it right now as an example because I've only bought it. I don't even have it for a year. So it's one of those things where, when I went in and I decided that I was quote unquote going to buy this house, I came away with the realization that, oh, this is a long-term application here. This is a long-term process. I'm not going to be here for the short term. This is something where I'm committing to a period of time, and no matter what I end up doing with this house is going to be in my life for a while. So, this is important to think about when we're applying wealth magic. Are we willing and able to live with the results? Because the results that we choose to manifest are very important. I apply this too. We talk about this in terms of money and stuff, but I'm going to apply this in terms of wealth magic to another thing, which is food. I think of food as a form of wealth. What we eat, how we take care of ourselves, what we put into ourselves is an investment in our body and in our future. How I take care of myself, the kinds of food I eat and all that. Well, if I'm doing, kitchen witchery, like doing cooking magic or whatever, I have to think about like, what is it that I'm trying to draw up? But also, what am I working with? What are the nutrients? What are the things that are there that are good for me or not good for me? It's the same kind of thing where the short-term effect is I've eaten a meal. Okay, I've taken care of my hunger. The long-term effect, though, is how is this going to affect my body in the days and weeks and months and years to come? You might think, well, one meal doesn't have a big deal, but it's the repeated meals. So if you look, like at the typical American diet, for example, you have, people that don't eat very well. And so it's the repeated dietary exposure that determines what happens. So it's kind of the same thing when we look at wealth magic. We look at the short term and the long term. And this is why, like with wealth magic, we want to look at every aspect of our lives not just money, for example, but like what are the other aspects? Like, okay, I've moved here to Eugene, Oregon. I'm going to be living here for who knows how many years. Um, I'm going to be involved in doing whatever it is that I'm involved in. I'm building a life here. What is that going to look like? There's those that wealth magic aspect, and of course, I mean those are things where you can come down and you can have a short term effect that you have intended for, and not have that work out. Um, and so then you also have to kind of adjust that. I mean, I think a lot of times with wealth magic and really magic in general, we get fixated on the near future. Well, this is what I'm manifesting now. But the thing is that the near future or the present is that's great, but we still have to live the rest of our lives. And so I think when we look at wealth magic and we apply it, we want to apply it very carefully. Now, I use the example of working with Saturn and Venus. And so I think, if we look at wealth magic also in terms of application of magic, we also have to look at it in terms of who/what do we draw upon? Do we work with spirits? Do we do practical wealth magic in and of ourselves? Do we do a synergy of it? I mean, I personally recommend doing a synergy, but sometimes it's better to work one angle or another. So my angle with like the house was strictly working with spirits, and one of the reasons why was because I knew I would be too attached to the outcome, but the spirits wouldn't be. So that was a smart approach. It's one of the reasons why I've also tend to like create magical entities. So I have a magical entity, for example, with my car, that's there to protect my car and also help me, be a better driver and all that. That that magical entity is very, very much plays a very specific role, so that I don't have to play that role as much. I'm not applying practical magic to that. So there, it's a good example. But then I have another thing where I have like these magnets that I was talking about in a recent video, where I have them hanging upside down on a metal thing, and then I have metal balls flowing down from them, and the gravity pulling them down. And the magnets serve this purpose. It's a practical magical working where I'm working with the element of gravity. I'm working with the element of magnetism to draw in the to draw in more sales, to draw in more awareness, to do other things along those lines. So it's a practical magical working as opposed to working with the spirit. So sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you want to look at that, and you got to keep in mind that one of the limitations of spirits is that a spirit does not have the same manifest desire or needs that you have. They're not going to understand things in the same way. um, but and that's where doing practical magic can be more applicable. So understanding that can be a very good thing. I think also that another aspect of wealth magic that's important to remember is that wealth doesn't have to come in the form of material benefits. Sometimes it comes in the form of opportunities. One of my earliest, or the very first magical entity I ever created, was an opportunity entity that makes me aware of opportunities. It filters and sifts through different things, and it helps me become aware of them. So that's another example. So when we look at wealth magic, we want to think about like what is the approach that we want to take. Do we want to work with spirits? Do we want to work with practical magic? Do we want to do a combination of both? These are things that we want to be thinking about. And of course, the way we approach it can take many different forms. I mean, you could do you could do some candle magic, for example, for wealth. You could do the magnets, for example. Do sigils. You could do other things. Of course, you can work with spirits. There's all kinds of different ways. I'm not going to really give a blow by blow, because I'm assuming that all of you can pick up books and read them, and that you can draw upon different ideas, and that you can come up with your own as well. I mean, this is really meant to be an overview of how to apply wealth magic from a perspective. And again, the thing I want to encourage you to do, and I mentioned this really in the first video and all that, is to wed your efforts to ongoing things that are already occurring in your life. Because I think that wealth magic is more effective when you can apply it toward something that you're already doing. I've done wealth magic, for example, and this is a good example of doing wealth magic. I've done wealth magic with pentacles. Like I have this pentacle of Mars right here, and I have a pentacle of for Jupiter for attracting wealth magic. I've used that to help me get some better some better money generating opportunities sometimes. And I've worked with those together. So I think that's like another important aspect here that can be played with. So think about it in terms of your own magical work. Like, what is the best magical approach to take? Do I work with a spirit? Do I do practical magic? Do I blend these together? If you blend them together, don't go overboard. Don't overkill it. I think another thing that people will sometimes do is they'll over enchant, and that means that they're not really ready to let go of whatever it is that they're trying to manifest, and so they won't manifest it. This is another term for lust for results. When I did my working for the house, I relied upon the astrological timing, and then I did the work with Aphrodite, and then I let it go. I had done everything I needed to do, and I didn't do anything further. I could have kept doing it, but continuing to do magical workings was not going to be beneficial in terms of the overall effects. So I think, understanding what you can or can't do and knowing when to let go is just as important as anything else. So those are some practical applications. And the next video that I'll end up doing in this series, which will be the last one for this, will be kind of looking at some of the mundane things as well. I mean, you might think that talking about need and discipline, but I'm going to be talking specifically about the mundane actions that you can take and why those are important as well. So thank you for watching. Hope that it's been helpful today, and feel free to leave comments, likes, all that other wonderful stuff. And otherwise, have a wonderful weekend.